The sound of her phone ringing sliced through the quiet of Gaynor's apartment. She glanced at the caller ID and froze. Her mother's name flashed across the screen, an unexpected call after 12 years of silence. Her heart skipped a beat. 12 years. Not a word, not a message, and now this. Her mind raced back to the last time she spoke to them. The shouting match in her old house, the bitter words exchanged with her father, the final, heavy silence when she walked out. The door had slammed behind her, and that had been the last time she saw her family. That moment had been the end of everything. Or so she thought. Taking a deep breath, Gaynor hesitated. She was living her life, far away from the toxicity of her past. Why now? Why after all this time? Her finger hovered over the decline button. She could ignore it, continue her peaceful existence. But what if something was wrong? What if something had happened to her father? Gritting her teeth, she answered. Hello. The voice on the other end was strained, hesitant, yet unmistakably familiar. Gaynor, it's Mom. Gaynor's stomach churned. She had been prepared for this moment for years, but had hoped it would never come. Why now? Mom, Gaynor said coldly, her voice betraying none of the hurt or confusion she felt. What's going on? Her mother's voice cracked. It's your father. He's sick. It's serious, Gaynor. He doesn't have long. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Time seemed to slow as the weight of them settled in. Her father, the man who had made her feel invisible for most of her life, the man who had preferred her sister, Lily, the golden child, was dying. A bitter laugh bubbled up in Gaynor's throat. Was this it? After all these years, was this the call that would bring her back into the fold? Her mother's voice continued, but it sounded far away now, as if muffled by a thick fog. He wants to see you. He needs to speak to you. There's something important. Gaynor's mind flooded with images of her childhood, her father's cold, dismissive attitude, her mother's silent compliance, and Lily, the perfect little sister, always getting what she wanted, always receiving love and attention. And Gaynor? She had been cast aside, an afterthought in her own home. She snapped back to the present. You wanted to come back? After all these years, after everything? Her mother's voice softened, almost pleading. Gaynor, please. This is bigger than your past. Your father, he wants to make things right. Please, for once, just come. The words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. Make things right? Could that even be possible? She had walked away from them for a reason. So why did she feel a flicker of something? Hope? Fine, Gaynor finally said, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest. I'll come. As soon as the call ended, Gaynor stood frozen in place, the silence pressing on her like a thick, suffocating fog. She couldn't tell if she was doing the right thing. But one thing was certain. She had to face her past. She had to face them. The past was calling. And whether she liked it or not, Gaynor was walking straight into it. The plane ride felt longer than it should have. Gaynor stared out of the small window, her fingers clenched tightly around the armrest. What was she doing? Every part of her wanted to turn around, go back to the life she had fought so hard to build, one where she didn't have to constantly question her worth. But as the landscape blurred beneath her, her thoughts drifted to a darker place. Her father's manipulation, her mother's silence, and Lily's effortless ability to win everyone's affection. Gaynor's childhood had been a series of forgotten moments, whispers of neglect woven into the fabric of every day. Her father had always treated Lily like a treasure, never questioning her, never pushing her to be more. And Gaynor? She had learned early on that she was just a shadow in their eyes, someone to be pushed aside when her sister's needs arose. She swallowed hard, the bitter taste of resentment flooding her throat. This was not the homecoming she had imagined. When the plane touched down, a heavy weight settled in her chest. The city felt foreign, a place she had abandoned long ago. Gaynor grabbed her suitcase from the baggage claim, her footsteps echoing in the sterile terminal. Her mother had insisted that she meet her at the hospital. Walking into the sterile, clinical environment of the hospital, Gaynor's heart raced. The familiar smells of antiseptic and the soft hum of fluorescent lights brought back memories of countless visits where her father had been absent, emotionally if not physically. She had come to hate hospitals, the cold, lifeless buildings that housed broken promises and failed attempts at healing. Her mother stood in the waiting area, pacing anxiously. The years had not been kind to her, but Gaynor couldn't bring herself to feel any sympathy. She had been the one to look the other way when her father tore their family apart. She had been the one to let Lily get away with everything. "Mom," Gaynor said quietly, her voice tense. Her mother looked up, her face softening. "Gaynor, you came." There was no apology, no recognition of the years of pain, just relief. Gaynor nodded curtly, not sure what else to say. The years of bitterness had made it impossible to simply walk back into this fractured family and pretend everything was fine. "How is he?" Gaynor asked, her tone betraying nothing. Her mother sighed, her eyes glistening with tears. "Not good. He's asking for you. He wants to make things right before it's too late." Gaynor stared at her mother, disbelief creeping in. Make things right? Could a lifetime of hurt and favoritism truly be undone in a few moments? Was there even a point in trying to fix something so broken? "Let's just go," Gaynor said finally, her voice hardening. She didn't trust her mother's words anymore. She couldn't trust them. They walked down the sterile hallway in silence, the tension between them thick and uncomfortable. The sound of a door creaking open signaled the end of their journey. Gaynor's heart thudded in her chest as she stepped into her father's room. He lay in a bed, pale and frail, hooked up to machines that beeped in rhythmic intervals. His once commanding presence had shrunk, reduced to a shadow of the man who had ruled their household with cold indifference. "Gaynor!" His voice was raspy, barely a whisper, but it still managed to send a jolt through her. She stood at the door for a moment, looking at the man who had been the source of so much pain in her life. Should she approach? Should she offer any kind of comfort to this man who had never comforted her? But then his eyes met hers. They were tired, weary eyes that seemed to see right through her, as if they knew the question she was asking. "You came," he said softly, his voice cracking. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the years of abandonment or cruelty, just a weak attempt to bridge a chasm that had only grown wider with time. Gaynor clenched her fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She didn't know whether to feel angry, sad, or indifferent. She had spent 12 years running from this moment, trying to forget the years of emotional neglect. Yet here she was, standing in front of him. "What do you want, Dad?" she asked, her voice unsteady but firm. Her father's eyes softened, but there was no warmth in them, just a coldness that mirrored her own. "I'm not going to make it, Gaynor," he said, his voice shaky. "But there's something I need you to do for Lily." Gaynor's breath caught in her throat. Lily, the name that had haunted her childhood, the name that always seemed to come first, the name that had made her feel like an outsider in her own home. "Not Lily," she spat, her voice rising. "Why do you always put her first? Why me? Why now?" Her father looked down, avoiding her gaze. "Because you're the one who left, Gaynor. You're the one who made something of yourself." The words hit harder than she expected. He was right. She had built a life for herself, one without them. But the implication, the guilt wrapped up in those words, felt suffocating. "You've got to make sure Lily's okay," he whispered, his frail hand reaching out to hers. She's been struggling. She needs you, Gaynor. Please." The request echoed in the sterile room, hanging in the air like a chain wrapped tightly around her chest. She stared at her father, at the man who had never once acknowledged her sacrifices, her hard work, her pain. And now, he wanted her to save Lily? A twisted knot of anger and betrayal clenched deep inside her. Was this how it was always going to be? She had worked so hard to break free from their expectations, from their need to control her life. And now, just as they were losing him, they wanted to pull her back into their toxic web. "No," Gaynor whispered, her voice barely audible. "I won't do it. Not anymore." Her father's hand faltered. "Please," he begged. "I'm asking you as a father." The words were a plea, but Gaynor could no longer hear them. She could only hear the echo of years of pain, years of being told she wasn't enough, years of watching Lily get everything while she was left behind. She turned away from her father's frail hand, walking towards a door. Her heart pounded, but the anger that boiled in her veins was now replaced with something colder, a firm resolve. She wasn't going to fall for it. Not again. This time, she was in control, and no one, especially not her family, was going to make her feel guilty for setting the boundaries she needed to protect herself. Gaynor stormed out her father's room, her heart racing with a mixture of fury and disbelief. Could he really be asking her this? After everything, after all the pain, he had the audacity to ask for her to care for Lily, the one who had always been the golden child, the one who never had to fight for anything. The fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway flickered above her, adding to the surreal weight of the moment. Gaynor's mind was spinning. Every step she took away from that room felt like a victory, but with each passing second, the guilt clawed at her more ferociously. Was she doing the right thing? Her father's voice echoed in her mind, pleading for Lily's future, as if she owed him something. Was that what this was about? A debt she could never pay? She had spent years paying her own way, proving she didn't need them. But now, when everything seemed to be crumbling, they wanted her to clean up their mess. The mess they had created by allowing Lily to coast by on their favoritism, while Gaynor had been forced to scrape by on her own. Gaynor's fingers gripped her phone tightly. She could still feel the weight of her father's frail hand, the desperate pressure of his request. Was this her fault? Had she really abandoned him? Her phone buzzed, and for a moment, her heart skipped. Lily. The name flashed on the screen, and Gaynor hesitated. What was this now? Another demand? Another guilt trip? She answered it, her voice colder than she intended. Lily. There was a brief silence on the other end before Lily's voice finally emerged, sweet and innocent, as always. Gaynor, I heard what happened. How's Dad? How's he doing? Gaynor's grip on the phone tightened. She couldn't tell whether Lily was genuinely concerned or whether she was just fishing for information. It was impossible to tell with her. Lily always had a way of making everything sound like she was the victim, like the world had wronged her. He's not doing well, Gaynor said flatly. He's asking for you. He's asking for everyone. There was a slight pause, and then Lily's voice softened. Gaynor, I know this isn't easy for you, but you have to understand. I've had a lot of struggles too. I've had things I couldn't control. Gaynor's patience snapped. Struggles? Lily had never known a real struggle in her life. Everything had always been handed to her on a silver platter. No, Lily. Gaynor's voice was icy now, her words sharp. You've never struggled. You've always had someone to fall back on. You've never had to fight for anything. And you've certainly never had to deal with being overlooked, ignored, and treated like second best for your entire life. There was a long silence on the other end, and Gaynor could practically hear the gears turning in Lily's head. She was trying to come up with the perfect thing to say, to manipulate the situation in her favor, just like always. But Gaynor wasn't in the mood for games anymore. I'm not going to fix this for you, Gaynor said, her voice steady. I'm not going to sacrifice my life for you again. Lily's voice cracked slightly. Gaynor, please. I can't do this on my own. I don't know how to manage everything without help. Gaynor closed her eyes, a sharp pain in her chest. She had heard it before. The helplessness, the fake vulnerability. It was always a show. Lily knew how to pull all the right strings, to make people feel sorry for her, to make them believe she needed saving. But Gaynor wasn't falling for it anymore. Lily, Gaynor said, her voice thick with emotion, you've never needed me. You've always had everything handed to you, and I'm done. I can't be the one to carry this burden anymore. I've spent my entire life making up for what you've lacked, and I'm not doing it again. She hung up before Lily could say anything more. The phone slipped from her hand, and she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But just as she was about to walk out of the hospital lobby, she was stopped. A hand touched her arm, and Gaynor turned to find her mother standing there, eyes wide with desperation. Gaynor, her mother said, her voice trembling. Please, don't turn your back on us now. This is your father's dying wish. Gaynor could feel her anger bubbling up, but she kept her voice steady. You don't get it, Mom. This isn't about Dad anymore. This is about you and your constant manipulation. You've always put everything on me, and I'm done. I've spent 12 years making a life for myself, and I'm not going to sacrifice it now. Her mother's face contorted with a mixture of hurt and anger. You think you're better than us? You think you've earned something we haven't? You've turned your back on your family for so long, and now you expect us to just let you walk away. The accusation stung, but Gaynor held her ground. I haven't turned my back on anyone, Mom, but I'm not going to let you continue using me. I've worked too hard to let you drag me back into this. There was a long silence as her mother's face fell. For the first time, Gaynor saw something in her mother's eyes that she had never seen before, regret. But just as quickly, her mother's demeanor changed. Her shoulders tensed, and her voice took on a new, cold tone. You'll regret this, Gaynor. You will regret abandoning your family when you could have made a difference. And with that, she walked away, her steps echoing in the empty lobby. Gaynor stood there, stunned, her heart pounding in her chest. She had expected some kind of resistance, but the finality of her mother's words hit harder than she anticipated. Was this truly the end? But as she stood in the lobby, staring after her mother, she realized something. She wasn't going back. The story that had been written for her, the one where she was always the dutiful daughter, the one who cleaned up after everyone, was over. Gaynor was done being the pawn in their twisted game. She had spent far too long sacrificing herself for a family that didn't see her, that didn't value her. Now, she was going to live for herself. And nothing was going to change that. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting a warm glow across Gaynor's apartment. The quiet comfort of her space felt like a sanctuary, her sanctuary. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of guilt or the pressure of her family's demands hanging over her. She stood by the window, gazing out at the bustling city below. But for once, the world outside didn't seem as overwhelming. It was as if she had finally broken free from the invisible chains that had bound her for so long. Gaynor had done it. She had walked away. As she reflected on everything that had led her here, the phone call, the confrontation, the long years of being the afterthought, the one who had to prove herself worthy of love and attention, she realized just how far she had come. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and Gaynor's heart skipped a beat. Lily. She had been waiting for this moment, expecting it. After the heated exchanges, the silence had lingered for days. And now, the inevitable had come. Gaynor hesitated before answering. The moment felt surreal, like a breaking point. Would this call be different? Would Lily finally accept what had been said? Or would she attempt to drag Gaynor back into the old patterns? With a deep breath, she picked up the phone. Gaynor? Lily's voice sounded smaller than usual, fragile even. I just want to say that I'm sorry. I know I've been selfish. I don't know what I was thinking, asking you for help. For a moment, Gaynor's heart softened. Could it be? Had Lily really changed? But then Lily continued, her voice gaining a bit of her usual strength. But you know, this isn't just about Dad anymore. It's about you, too. You've always had the upper hand. You've always been able to walk away. But this time, you need to come back. You need to help me. I don't know what to do without you, Gaynor. Gaynor's heart sank as the familiar manipulative tone crept back in. This wasn't an apology. It was another attempt to get her back. I'm not coming back, Lily, Gaynor said, her voice firm, without hesitation. And I'm not going to feel guilty for choosing myself. I've spent my whole life trying to be what you wanted me to be, trying to fix everything for everyone else. But I'm done. I've finally realized that I don't owe anyone that. Not even you. Lily's silence on the other end felt heavy. The manipulation that had been so expertly woven into their relationship over the years was finally exposed. Gaynor could almost hear Lily's heart beating faster, the realization dawning on her. You don't owe me anything, Gaynor, Lily finally said, her voice small, but this time there was no hidden demand. I understand now. Maybe I was wrong. Gaynor let out a slow breath, the release of years of pent-up frustration coursing through her. You have to figure things out on your own, Lily. I'm not your fallback anymore. It's time for both of us to grow up. For the first time, Gaynor felt truly free. She hung up the phone and set it down gently, her hands trembling not with fear, but with relief. She was finally free. Days turned into weeks, and the heaviness that had once been so familiar began to fade. Gaynor's decision to move forward had not been easy, but it was the right one. As time passed, she found herself rediscovering parts of her life she had almost forgotten. Her joy, her confidence, and her ability to trust herself. Her work flourished. She was finally given the promotion she had worked so hard for, not because someone had forced her to do it, but because she had earned it on her own terms. And in the midst of all this, there was one person who had always stood by her, Aunt Rachel. Aunt Rachel had never expected anything from Gaynor. She had simply been there, genuinely supportive, always encouraging, and never once asking for anything in return. Their bond had been a lifeline for Gaynor throughout the years, and now, as she looked at her aunt with gratitude, she realized that this was family, not the manipulation, not the favoritism. This was the love that had been missing all along. One evening, Gaynor sat with Aunt Rachel and Uncle Mike in their cozy living room, a warm cup of tea in hand, laughing over old stories and enjoying the peace that had finally settled in her heart. "I'm proud of you, kiddo," Uncle Mike said, his voice full of pride. Gaynor smiled, a genuine smile, and felt a warmth in her chest. She was proud of herself, too. "Thank you," Gaynor said softly, her eyes brimming with emotion. "You've always been there for me. You were the ones who taught me what love really meant." Aunt Rachel reached across the table and took Gaynor's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've always believed in you, Gaynor. You're stronger than you know." The words felt like a balm to her soul. She was stronger than she had ever known. And in that moment, she realized something vital. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not to her parents, not to Lily, not to anyone. The true meaning of family wasn't about blood or obligations. It was about love, understanding, and support. And Gaynor had finally found it. Gaynor leaned back, staring out the window at the setting sun, feeling the freedom of having made her own choices. The road ahead was clear, and for the first time, it was entirely hers to walk. Her future wasn't tied to the past anymore. She was free to live her life, free to be herself. And for the first time in years, Gaynor was truly at peace.